Well, good morning and welcome to Faith for Living, another beautiful day here at Lakeside, Chautauqua. And we're happy to be here with Dr. Myron Mccoy, the senior pastor at Chicago Temple, First United Methodist Church in Chicago. We're very happy to have him this week and concluding his series this morning on sheep, shepherding, and staying on the path. And as we begin, I would remind you that this evening will be Vespers here at the Steele Memorial Bandstand. Our pastor of Lakeside United Methodist Church, Karen Graham, will be with us, and she will be continuing her series on the fruits of the Spirit, and Holy Communion will be celebrated. That's this evening at 7 o'clock, and we have changed the time this week from 7:30 to 7 because of the sun setting earlier these days. And I remind you that Sunday we will be having dockside worship here on Sunday morning with the Reverend Jan Fillmore, the associate pastor of Mayfield United Methodist Church, and then at 10:30, the Reverend Dr. Jack Harnish, pastor emeritus from Birmingham, Michigan, will be our guest preacher on the live stream service, and he will be with us next week here at the bandstand talking about the minor prophets, one each day. It will be a very interesting and inspirational week for all of us. I also remind you that our Religious Life Seminar next week will be based on the book Divided by Faith, Religion and the Problem of Race in America. And this book is on sale at the Fine Print Bookstore. You can pick up a copy. You don't need to have read it before the seminar, but it would be helpful to have the book. And that will be Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at the train station patio and led by Dr. Greg Linville. It is, again, my privilege to welcome to our bandstand Dr. Myron Mccoy. We appreciate not only his presence with us, but the support of Bob and Becky Breimer, who are supporting this week. And if you would like to sponsor a preacher for next year or help sponsor one, I would love to talk with you between now and the end of the summer. At this time, please, to set our mood for the day, let us listen to the music of Michael Schertz, who is with us again.
I will rise, I will go to Jesus. He will embrace me in his arms of my dear Savior. Oh, there are 10,000 charms. Come, ye sinners, poor and weary, weak and wounded, sick and sore, in the arms of my dear Savior, you can rest forevermore. I will rise, I will go to Jesus. He will embrace me in his arms of my dear Savior. Oh, there are 10,000 charms. Oh, the land of the cloudless skies. Oh, the land of the uncloudy day. Oh, they tell me of a home far beyond the skies. Oh, they tell me of an uncloudy day. Oh, the land of the cloudless sky. skies. Oh, the land of the uncloudy day. Oh, they tell me of a home far beyond the skies. Oh, they tell me of an uncloudy day. Ah, fly away, oh glory. Ah, fly away. Oh, when I ride, hallelujah, by and by. Oh, Lord, I'll fly away. Ah, fly away, oh glory. Ah, fly away. Oh, when I die, hallelujah, by and by. Oh, Lord, I'll fly away.
Michael, thank you so much. Now, would you give a warm lakeside welcome to Dr. Myron Mccoy?
Good morning. It's good to be with you, and it has been my joy and privilege to share these last several days with you. How many of you were here on Tuesday evening? Let me see hands. All right. There's no right or wrong answer. But what I want to do is return back to that psalm that we're all familiar with, the 23rd Psalm. And the title of my remarks this morning is Marching Off the Map. Marching off the map. Now, like you, you're probably familiar, as I look at the ages that are present, you're probably familiar with the King James Version translation of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In an earlier time in history, when much of the world was yet unexplored, unknown, and largely unmapped, maps portrayed those unknown regions with dragons, monsters, and sometimes large fish. The not too subtle inference of such maps was that these were frightening and fearsome places. Though some of the maps asserted the possibility of also finding fortunes, those symbols sent an ominous message: stay where you are. Don't go there. Don't go any further. Dangers and dreads dwell there. Folklore claims that the commander of a battalion of Roman soldiers was so engaged in battle that he positioned his troops into an area illustrated by map makers with monsters and dragons and those large fish. And the commander, not knowing whether to advance on ahead into an unknown or to turn back into the known devastation, sent a courier to Rome with this urgent request. Please send new orders. We have marched off the map. As I contemplate the future and think about our individual churches, our different denominations, no matter what denomination we are, and the whole matter of the Christian movement in this country, we find ourselves in such a strange place. Unexplored, unknown, and uncharted. We're there. We're there with organizations that we grew up with, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, YMCA, YWCA. We're there with private colleges, and Ohio is one of those states where you have hundreds of liberal arts colleges spread all across the land, and who knows, with the cost of education, the pandemic that's going on, what it will mean to those schools. And I kind of study schools, especially in the Northeast and here in the Midwest. If schools do not have large endowments, it's pretty rough. These are uncharted paths for those schools. Many of them are related to different denominations that you are part of. Church camping programs. Even our involvement with youth and young adults, and whether you're what we call mainline denomination or more evangelical denomination, we're all losing our young people. In this whole pandemic situation, we've marched off the map, as we've tried to figure a way to respond to it. Who would have thought that our states would be in competition with one another for supplies instead of us coming together and working it out and seeing that we're all in this together? I want to suggest to you that we are in unexplored, unknown, and uncharted territory. In many respects, we have lost sight of our connection, being part of movements that are beyond ourselves. We have lost sight of and support and trust in our institutions. We have lost sight of the essential question, what will help to ensure a stronger future for those who come after us? We're not even considering that anymore. We're almost in a mindset, if I get there, that's okay. Those who come after me, let them find their own way. We've lost sight of our unity, and like many of our fellow U.S. citizens, we have been stoking the flames or sat on the sidelines of recent examples of anti-Semitism, racism, misogyny, and xenophobia. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his final book, written in 1967, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? The truth be told, you and I stand much closer to chaos in 2020 than to community. In many respects, we even seem unaware of our changed status and role in society. And not only our role in society as Christians, but our role in society as world citizens. God help us. God help us. We're in uncharted territory, and we find ourselves situated with the dragons, the monsters, and the large fish. We're off the map. But we can't stay here, and we can't go backwards. Beating a hasty retreat and returning to the good old days is not an option. How many of you wish that you could go back and be younger again, 17 and 18? Some of you were here. You don't want to go back, do you? We cannot go back to the ways of yesterday. They are just that, yesterday. And the good old days were probably not as good as have been romanticized. Many of the ways of yesterday are irrelevant in today's culture, both within and outside the church walls. However, we cannot remain in our present condition. We cannot remain in our present condition. We cannot remain in our present condition. So we ask ourselves, our churches and this nation, how do we navigate hope, find direction, and move through the yet uncharted realm beyond what we now see and experience? Who and what can we lean on when we have marched off our maps? I'm convinced that as we pursue healing on many fronts and seek to reconnect, we regain sight and vision. It's not turning on one another, it's turning to each other. We begin to see again the big picture, that we are bigger, we're better and stronger together than we are as individuals trying to navigate this terrain by ourselves. Our faith tradition and our sacred biblical and Christian writings serve to guide our steps along the path of finding our way back together. And the familiar words of Psalm 23 are a great reservoir of certainty, confidence, and conviction for us always, and particularly in those times when we have marched off the map. David inserted two key words, and they're there in the King James Version: though and through. Though and through. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. And you know, they are the same word with the exception of that additional letter R. And this one little letter R makes all the difference in the world. This one letter can turn your though into through. This is the letter that can map the future path and provide direction when we have marched off our maps. David, the innocent shepherd boy, knew the truth behind the first word, though, for dangers lurked around every bend. There was no if about growing obstacles and problems. In Psalm 23, David candidly faced the inevitable. The psalmist proclaimed, "No if, but though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, though I march off the map." We don't really have to live very long to discover that life is not always a banquet and overflowing cups, do we? Any of you live life where your cup is just overflowing all the time? We want to see you. Sometimes our hair is not anointed with oil, but grimed with grease. Sometimes we're not lying in green pastures, but we're spinning in our blue Mondays. Sometimes we're not resting on the shore of still waters. We can't always be here at Lakeside. And sometimes those waters get pretty rough, don't they? And sometimes we're struggling in the shadows of death, yet as we walk beyond life's changing scenes and challenges, Psalm 23 reminds us, "Thou art with us." God is with us. How many of you have discovered God being with you as you walk through challenging times? Don't know how you would have made it out of it. Life and even church certainly has its ups and downs, yet none on the journey avoid the downs, the valleys. The psalmist, however, makes it plain that God does not intend for us to stay in our valleys. They are only something we go through. Valleys are not resting places, but passageways. Valleys are not destinations, but detours, obstacles, forks in the road, trenches, and adaptive stepping stones. But on the journey, we can walk through life's separations and sorrows in all our journeying, even when we have marched off our maps. In American Sign Language, the one letter R is made by crossing the middle finger over the index finger. But the crossing of fingers has an older history that predates American Sign Language for those who identify as Christian. In the first century, when Christianity was wholly illegal, believers were vigorously and often fatally persecuted. We don't know anything about living in that kind of time. And they found subtle ways to communicate their faith, accompanying a greeting or a farewell. Cross fingers were a code sign identifying Christians to one another as people of the cross. And the cross fingers were a mute symbol for the cross of Christ and the redemption it brought for persons. Nothing to do with luck and everything to do with a trust in God. David said that he had no fear in adversity because of the comfort of God's power. I fear no evil, your rod and your staff comfort me. Perhaps David was referring to the shepherd's crook and its hook on one end. A good shepherd would use it to guide the sheep lest they stray away. And the gentle tap of the staff on the lamb's side would move the animal back into the fold. And the crook would gather up a sheep from a place where it might have fallen. David felt comforted that the shepherd was guarding his steps, not only in his present circumstances, but also in the future. That grace would see him all the way home. As John Newton penned, through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. Even though the maps of life don't seem to have a way forward, that grace will sustain you and me and lead us through this present situation all the way home. That's if we turn to each other rather than turning on each other. That's if we see one another as allies and fellow pilgrims in the struggle, rather as competitors or persons that we have to put down in order to make ourselves feel up. Even though it's pretty shaky out here right now, I just have a hope and a confidence that we can get through. You know, there's enough brain power, enough experience between everyone to help us do it. I want to look at the spiritual pyramid, worship. Someone asked about worship the other day. Meaningful worship is built upon the foundation of our personal prayer and Bible study. And it's made more meaningful when we are engaged in small groups to grow in our discipleship and to work with each other in strengthening our church and in strengthening our ability to get through our present situations. I want to say helicoptering into worship each week without any of its foundational practices makes it difficult for us to connect with God, each other, and even ourselves. Or another way of putting it, if we put all of our spiritual freight on 1 hour, because most of us don't want no more than 1 hour, and in fact, we'd be satisfied if it were only 45 minutes. Am I right? Our spirits would be gasping for spiritual sustenance. It is like eating once a week, relying on an hour to feed us rather than taking in small meals throughout the week. We need a lot of small meals all during the week to get us through. As we worship God throughout our days, we better prepare ourselves for corporate worship. In what ways do you worship during the week? And how does that impact your experience of worship? These further questions for reflection. Where have you personally marched off the map? How can that experience help you in the season as a church, as a citizen, in uncharted territory, how might, though, become true in your life? Where have you experienced this with God and with others? As an individual, make a list of the off-the-map places. How have you allowed them to divide you from others, from God? In what ways do you see the identifying R, the cross finger, as an indication of the cross of Christ, and your identity as a Christ follower impacting your way forward in the current marching off the map condition of our culture and our church? What impact will this have for you? And finally, I want to close by reading another translation of the 23rd Psalm. And this comes from the United Methodist produced Common English Bible. And it's blowing up here fiercely. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He lets me rest in grassy meadows. He leads me to restful waters. He keeps me alive. He guides me in proper paths for the sake of his good name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they protect me. You set a table for me right in front of my enemies. You bathe my head in oil. My cup is so full it spills over. Your goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the Lord's house as long as I live. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I think your off-the-map analogy is really, really good, in that many churches need to be thinking about that, because there obviously was not a church in the United States that had ever thought about what was going to happen if they couldn't meet anymore. And I hope as they plan, I hope they're planning and thinking about it, is what could we lose the First Amendment? Could we have another kind of a illness that would shut people down? Could the stock market collapse? What should churches be thinking about? Because most people, from the surveys I've seen, were choosing their church by the style of music. Not even the preaching was drawing into these mega churches. And it was that way in our church. Of all the services we had, the ones with even my husband and I, we like traditional. So we chose a service that had liturgy, whereas other people would choose a praise service. That really doesn't give you a whole lot to go on if you don't have a map. And I hope somebody out there is going to think about your recommendation of what happens when you don't have the map anymore.
You made me think, once this whole pandemic thing is over, and I think it's wrong for us to assume that everybody's going to go back to church like they have been going before. I think this has changed us in ways we have no idea what the change is going to be. And to be frank with you, some of us that are worshiping online will continue to worship online. Doesn't mean that they will not gather, but I think there's a recognition that it fits a need, a desire of people to not be rushed out in the morning. I think some people will be hesitant to immediately go back. Now you mentioned First Amendment. I was sharing the other day at lunch. You know, as I try to think of doing church, being church, everybody, any of you ever went to the automats in New York City years ago? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Well, the automats, they were restaurants in which, you know, there was a whole variety of different kind of meal options, and they were all in glass windows, and you took what you wanted. You took the dessert. If you wanted peach pie, you took that. If you wanted cherry pie, you took that. Apple pie, you took that. A custard pie, you took that. But you didn't spit on it, somebody else's. You just took what you wanted. And if you wanted to drink Coke or Pepsi or orange, you took what you wanted. If you wanted coffee or tea, we have to recognize everybody does not like the same thing. We don't do everything alike. We're all different, just like each leaf on these different trees. Even on the same tree, each leaf is different. And so we have to provide as many different options to address the needs of people as there are. I think the day of, and we're finding this with our young people, the day of trying to make everybody fit the same cookie cutter model will not work. And so it's providing variety while not letting the variety think that they are any different or any better. You know, do that with church music. Love all church music. There's none better. There's none. You hear some musicians talk about good music and bad music. If it's God's, it's all good. And you may not like a particular style, but you take what you need. Don't spit on somebody else's. Let them get what let them get what helps them to be the person they believe that God is trying to make them be. And then in that, help. And this is where pastors and key lay leaders are helpful, helping everybody to see that even though we do it differently and we have different interests, we're all on the same team. We're all on the same team. And this is what we got to get back to in our country. You can be Republican, Democrat, Independent, but we're all in the same country. We're all Americans. Well, you've got me going from answering the question to preaching and meddling.
we're a couple families of rural area down close to the Amish country. The Amish practice family and enjoying nature and teaching the older family members, teaching the young members about nature. Do you find it important for us to be out in nature, enjoying and learning about what God has made for us to enjoy?
That's why I'm talking about sheep and shepherds. I think there are concepts that, and certainly I grew up in the city, but there's, I've lived in the New York metropolitan area, Chicago metropolitan area, but I've also lived in small towns where maybe 600 or less are part of the community. All of them are God's people. We can learn from each other. We need to learn from each other. And there's no right or wrong. There is no place. And that's true. I've lived in different parts of the country, you know, and people on the east think the people in the Midwest and the people in the South, we're all, we can learn from one another. We all breathe the same air, whether we recognize it or not. And so, indeed, getting in touch with rural concepts, getting in touch with nature is most important. And we need to address some of the things that we're doing to harm our environment. Or we won't be able to be in the big cities without good air and trees. And I think we can learn even from watching how animals care for their own, how it is that we need to care for our own. I hope that addresses you in some way.
This is probably more of a comment to his question, but I have really appreciated this service being outside. I mean, this is so much nicer than being inside Orchestra Hall. And I'm going to regret the day it returns to Orchestra Hall.
This has been nice, and it certainly has worked out well with the pandemic, and it has worked out well with the weather. If it were raining, I want to be inside. But if it's not, let's be out here.
Use inside for bad weather, but outside all the other times. And then another thing along the same line, of course, our service is online. And we just get to sit there in our back room, which has lots of windows, and enjoy nature as we are worshiping. And we can watch the goldfinch come as the music is. And, you know, it has added a lot. We are in shorts and our T-shirt. No time spent, you know, getting, putting on a dress or anything like that. It just seems to be more natural and more God-centered. But that might be my imagination. But we have really enjoyed having church. But what you miss are the people. And yeah. So, you know, you need both. But I would like to see us do more outside when the weather's nice.
Yeah, you're not alone in that feeling, and staff is noting that and trying to make that work as we go forward. Thank you for sharing that.
I was just wondering how you feel about worship being comforting versus worship being challenging. Because I enjoy the online services that we've been able to participate in. But I always thought of worship as a time to refill, but also to be challenged and be a little uncomfortable. And I'm not sure that I'm uncomfortable enough when I'm sitting in front of my computer screen.
Yeah. Maybe you didn't hear the right preacher if you're not uncomfortable. I think that it's not either or, it's both and. You can go to, as preachers, we have to be very careful that we're not always comforting without challenging. And we have to also be careful that we're not always challenging and not comforting. It's kind of like if we were out on a rowboat, you need both oars to move forward. And I think I have been, as I think about myself, I've been, and this is even before the pandemic, I've been convicted hearing messages on the, we didn't do Zoom then, the radio, messages that challenged and got my attention. And even though we're suffering today, we still, as I said on, I believe yesterday, we cannot have a religion that's always about comfort, or we are cheating the gospel out of its full power.
Yeah, toward the end of your talk, you talked about reviewing, like thinking about times in the past when you felt you were off the map. And you said those were times to be able to reflect on God's faithfulness and seeing you through. But you also mentioned that it's an opportunity to reflect on whether those times have separated you from others. I wanted to know if you could expand on that a little bit.
My question was about times that when we've been through something, sometimes people go through sorrow, and as you deal with the different stages of grief, there are times when people withdraw from others versus turning to others. I think even in our, I was in the bed and breakfast that I stayed at this morning, one incident, they talked about was, when this whole pandemic thing started, where you look at what we did as society, everybody was going for the toilet paper, not getting so much, unconcerned about if you had any or the next person, but being so consumed and caring for only me. We're still in a situation in this country where, and I'm going to step out here on Second Amendment rights. Where do you know, as we went into this shelter in place, there were more guns purchased, thinking that we had to protect ourselves from one another? Those are some of the ways in which I think we separate ourselves from other when we're going through things.
Good morning. I'm curious as to what thoughts you may have about online worship as it is and whether it is dangerous to the continuing existence of the church. I'm thinking in two directions. If you're online, you miss fellowship. And also, if you're online, it is hard for the institutional church to be able to practice stewardship. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I'm one of those. You know, I think in life you can see a glass as half empty or half full. And I'm probably of the ilk. I'm going to see the glass as half full. And so the online worship was not something I really did a great deal of thinking about, but was forced to go right into it. One of the ways that I went into it with my congregation is I know a lot of churches, you develop videos and, you know, at a certain time they release them and everything is cooked and you watch it. I chose an alternative method. So we have 3 services a weekend. So we have 3 services a weekend, and then if you miss the 3 services, then you can see the online service. But in my online experience, I see those who wish to be seen. You know, you can cut your cameras off, but I see, and they can see me, they can see one another. As I said the other day, we have online coffee hours after the services where we can see and talk to one another. Like many churches, we had already implemented ACH giving, so it's taken out of me before. You know, every time I get a check, it's deducted out of my account. I don't miss it, and so we encourage people to do it. In fact, with any of you bankers in here, do you know that that is the cheapest way? That is the most stewardship efficient way to give to the church, by having them to deduct it out of your account. Banks charge you for checks. They charge you to count your coins and money. But they don't charge you yet, or at least they haven't started yet, to charge you for deducting it out of accounts. They charge you for when you swipe your card. But if you do it like you do your bills where it's deducted out, there is electronically, there is no charge. So in the beginning, the first several months of the pandemic, I think people, you know, they're in the beginning, folks were very much on. They were giving their money. They were in attendance. Now, summer has experienced a little fall off, but I think it's important for churches, even though you may be on, have a virtual service, it's important to stay in contact where you can call people, have your people call people. People want to be connected. We're not out here by ourselves. We do need to check on one another. We do need to check on our seniors. We need to check on our young people who are living alone. And we need to check on families that some of them went through periods of high stress as folks had to work and also educate their kids at the same time. So we have to find ways to be the church. The other thing with the style that I chose is I recognize that some of my people are not technologically savvy, so they can call in and hear the services. I think it's important not to cut anybody out and to look for as many possible ways to communicate with people and not just rely on developing a video to send to your members. That will not create and sustain community.
I want to thank you for your presentation all week, and I want to share with the folks that are here and also with the folks that are watching us online that the spiritual pyramid that you've been talking about this week, I have copies here with me, and it's also been downloaded, or I should say uploaded onto the Lakeside website, so you can see that.